the little thing. So awesome. Welcome to the council table. I can't believe it's October the 4th of this year. As we did a council table a couple of weeks ago, I did like a prophetic overlay of what I was seeing for the next year, but also did a sort of a precursor to what I'd been seeing over the last 20 years to kind of lead up to this coming year. And it's going to be hard for me to believe because I can't, the culture is in such disarray and chaos. What God is intending, he's opened up a lot of opportunities for each one of us, but he wants us to play our position. And that's where I'm excited about hearing from Ed today. Ed is, the Lord has kind of given me some insight. I've just gotten to know Ed recently, and it tenderizes me to have people like Ed on, but he mirrors what I think is in every one of you, but he has the heart of David in him. And David had a magnificent ability to hold things in tension. He could hold a lamb on the one side, but he could hold a sword in the other to take somebody's head off. I don't mean to be too graphic, but you see the tension there. And the body of Christ has got to learn how to be this kind of warrior, but worshiper. You may have heard those kind of sort of conflicting feelings. And each one of us are learning how to do that. Ed is being drawn out to that, to mentor us and to teach us how to learn to not only take the word of God, but take it into action and do it with confidence, but with such love and compassion, it just blows the people away. So Ed, I just love that you can come here today. I love that you've spent, the time that you have getting us to this point. In other words, your training and background and bringing what the Lord has shared with you, brother. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, thank you for having me on. And I think I just heard you say, I just have unlimited time, right? Which is basically the worst possible thing you can say to me. I'm just kidding. My plan, just so you know my plan, I'd love to just share for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and then I'd love to open it up. I have some things that, as you were introducing yourself, some of you, God just whispered a couple things to me for you. So I'd love to be able to say that to you. And if for some reason you need to leave, we can connect later on, and I'm happy to share that with you. But let me just look you in the eye and say that first of all, we're in the best time on planet Earth to be alive. We're in one of the biggest and most significant periods of transition the world has ever experienced. And every moment of every day, that becomes more and more apparent. So I'll tell you real quick, last week, I was so I had a keynote speech, one of my businesses that I do, speaking for big companies. So I was in West Virginia at the Greenbrier Hotel giving a keynote speech last Wednesday. And actually what God had me do is fly into Washington, D.C., which is like 4 hours away, so it's not even close. Drive all the way across Virginia into the Greenbrier, drive back, and I had a whole day to pray at the Capitol. And God showed me all these things as I was just walking. I mean, I literally walked from the Lincoln Memorial, past the White House, around the White House, through the elliptical, down the entire mall, down from the mall, all the way back to the Jefferson Memorial, and then back to near the White House to get some of the best oysters in the world, by the way, at Epic's Cafe. And then that next morning, I woke up, flew to Los Angeles. I had another keynote speech. I walked down the hill in University City, right where Universal Studios are, ended up at this park with this unbelievably powerful prayer in the spirit. And then I walked past the very place where California was formed, literally where the Mexican army surrendered to the United States Army, and California was formed. And so essentially in a period of 24 hours, I was able to pray on the Capitol and in the founding place of California, which, by the way, it should be surprising to you that right where California was founded, Universal Studios and the Comcast building are literally right there. I mean, it's just unbelievable what happens when it comes to power centers. And God is in the middle right now of completely destroying the enemy's stronghold. It's taken the enemy 80 to 200 years to be able to build what they've been able to build. And the way I see it, God's completely dismantling those things, and it should take about another maybe a year and a half at the most to be able to do that. And so my job is really simple. My job is to help God's people be equipped for what is coming to them. I'll be very direct about this. A lot of the people right now in the prophetic communities are speaking of essentially this big wealth transfer. Some of you have heard that term, or the idea that God is moving his positioning and his authority to his people. By the way, that's all true. But at the same time, at the current pace, the church is not going to receive what God has for them, not because God isn't giving it to them, but simply because they're pushing it away. And I want to talk about that for just a couple minutes real quick, and then I'm going to open it up for whatever questions, comments, thoughts. Let me just click over real quick. I'm going to change my studio here and just jump onto my whiteboard. For those of you who know me, this is my favorite means of teaching. I've got a big event next week.
Amen.
Several hundred people come to my God Talks live event, and this is I'll be in a different studio, but this is where I'm going to be. So like really quickly, let me just go back into my F-18 career. I'll just give you a little quick bio, and then I'm going to teach just for a few minutes, and then I'll open it up for prayer and some questions. And so I'll start by saying this. There is a procedure that every pilot knows, okay? Every pilot, doesn't matter what they fly, who they fly. I guarantee Michelle could tell you her out-of-control flight procedure. But when an airplane is out of control, typically you're falling to the ground at about 20,000 feet per minute. And most pilots have a procedures manual. In the F-18, we have a little 6x9 manual, fully laminated, that you could go through and look if you have a problem. But if you're falling to the ground at 20,000 feet per minute, you don't have time to like read a book, you know? And so you memorize the procedure. In the F-18, it goes controls release, feet off rudder, speed brake in, auto altitude, airspeed, that's how it starts. I have it memorized. If you look at 2 o'clock in the morning tonight, said, you know, you're out of control, you immediately jump out of bed and be, why are you in the house? This is really weird.
Hey, yeah, Ed, it's breaking up.
My connection's breaking up. You guys hear it? No? Hang on a second. Let me switch over to my hard internet. Hang on.
You there, Bill?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right now, it looks like I got a good connection, a really good connection. You guys hear me?
Yeah, it's breaking up for some reason, and I'm trying to wonder if it's on my side. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, I've got like a lightning fast right now. So anyway, you guys still with me?
Yeah, it's back.
There
Okay.
you go.
All right. So anyway, when you're out of control in an F-18, you're falling to the ground at about 20,000 feet per minute. So when I was flying, most pilots never find themselves out of control. I actually did it twice. The second time I did it, I was flying, I was training this really young student, found myself in a spin. If you're familiar with a spin in an F-18, or actually any airplane, basically in a spin, you've got 2 main problems. Number one, the wings are completely stalled. So if you're a pilot, you pull the stick all the way back and you just essentially stall out the wings so that they're not flying through the air anymore. They're actually buffeting through the air. That essentially is a stall. And if you take that stall, kick full left rudder, and actually spin the airplane around like this, that's a spin. So you're stalled and spinning. You've got 2 axes of problems. That's why it's such a big issue when you spin an airplane. And in this dogfight against this young student, I ended up completely in a spin. Now, to give you an idea about how to recover an F-18 out of a spin, the perfect recovery as you're falling to the ground at 20,000 feet per minute involves pushing the stick all the way forward. And if you're in a spin to the left, while you're completely disoriented, you push the rudder fully to the right. Okay, now here's the trick about this maneuver. At some point, what will happen is the spin will stop. And when the spin stops, you have about a half of a second to reset the rudders and to pull the stick back to neutral. And if you don't do that, near simultaneously, within about a half second, the airplane will actually spin back to the right again. So there's been pilots who have been spinning to the left, falling to the ground at 20,000 feet per minute. They go and they stop it, end up going back to the right, falling to the ground at 20,000 feet per minute. So about 25 years ago, some software designer, when they were creating the fly-by-wire system for the F-18, said, hey, why don't we just code into the airplane software the perfect spin recovery so that when the pilot gets themselves in a problem, all they have to do is release the controls. When they release the controls, the airplane takes over and knows what to do. So when I was flying against my young student, got myself into a spin, which is a pretty deadly thing that can happen. The first step in the out of control flight procedure is actually to let go. If you heard what I said, when I did the procedure, it goes controls release, feet off rudder, speed brake in. So when I was out of control against my student, or when I was flying against my student and I went out of control, the first thing I did is follow the procedure, let go of the controls, feet off the rudders, pulled my knees up like some kind of flying turtle, let go of the throttle, and the airplane is spinning now to the left, 18,000 feet, 17,000 feet, 16, 14, still going. Next thing you know, at about 12,000 feet, the airplane finds its center, the nose actually bucks over, starts getting some airspeed, and at about 8,000 feet, I completely recovered this airplane. A very nervous pilot, frankly, a very embarrassed pilot, but a very alive pilot, simply because of an amazing software. When I tell this story, there's a little bit of a longer version of the story. when I tell the story, I'm like, look, that's the guy, the engineer. That's the guy who I need to buy a beer to for saving my life, because he wrote into the software this brilliant procedure where the airplane finds its center and then begins to recover itself. And the reason I tell the story is really simple, which is you as an individual, as a human being, have been designed with this beautiful software. You've got a hardware called the conscious mind. You've got this unbelievable background software called the subconscious mind. And you have what I teach called a superconscious mind, which is your connection to God.
Amen.
And if you look into your life, for example, if you see that there's a series of results in your life, your business, your bank account, your influence, your relationships, essentially those results have come because of a set of actions. And those actions have come from a set of thoughts. If you're responsible for your life, which of course you are, there's a way of thinking that has created essentially a series of results. And so one of the things that I do is I work with business owners and entrepreneurs to help them grow and cast their vision. Ideal person that comes to work with me has either a founder or they're in the $500,000 to maybe about $5 million range, or maybe all the way up to about 10. That's sort of like a key group for me that I can work with. And if you're familiar with all the gifts of the Spirit, the gifts of the one gift, I flow in all the gifts, but the one gift that God's really grown in me is the gift called word of wisdom. So you're familiar probably with word of knowledge, and I certainly have that gift where I'll be able to say certain things to people and it really hits them and makes sense in a certain way. But the one gift that God's given me is word of wisdom, the ability to look specifically for business, by the way, the ability to look specifically in a business. Like when people come to me and do coaching, one-on-one coaching, it's usually anywhere between $25,000 and $70,000 to work with me for the year. When someone works with me, usually the first thing we do is a 5-hour one-on-one session where we sit down together, and the first 20 minutes, I'm listening to God for them. And just so you know, I work with believers, but I also have atheists, Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, skeptics, everybody, like all agnostics, all walks of life come in, and they all know the first 20 minutes, Ed's going to be hearing from God. And I kid you not, I've had some crazy things happen. My last client that was in my office, I started giving him words from God, and this guy wasn't a believer at all. And literally like 2 hours into the coaching session, he goes, "So are you like clairvoyant or something?" So he's like, "Are you clairvoyant?" I said, "Hey, Rob, I don't really call it that." I said, like, some people I know would be offended by that. I appreciate you saying that. I said, it's more like me and God are just having a conversation about you. Because I was literally telling him things. God was showing me very specific people in his life that I had never met, and he didn't even know I knew. And I started speaking about their influence in his life. He's like, "Wait a second, you clairvoyant?" And the reason I'm telling this whole story about all the people that I work with and this idea of word of wisdom, like God's given me this gift to be able to look at a business or an organization and go, it's that, and that's all, instead of these 80 things that you're doing over here. And when people walk out of the room with me, they feel a lot lighter. They feel far more purposeful, and they feel like, wow, that was so simple. Mm-hmm. Why didn't I see that? And if you operate in God's wisdom, people will always say, "Oh, that was so simple," because when God delivers, look, God's plans are not complicated. Remember the story about the king that came to Elijah, I believe it was, and he said, "I need to be healed from this." I think his name is Naaman. He was the servant to the king. And he said, "I need to be healed from leprosy." And Elijah's like, "Just go wash in that river." And the guy's like, "That's so simple. It wasn't even hard. Why wouldn't you give me something hard? We always want hard solutions to our simple problems." And God's solutions are always very simple. Now, the reason that I do the software discussion is because I will be working with someone, and all of a sudden I'll see like boom, boom in the spirit, and I'll see like that person has some sort of money block, and they're never going to be able to make whatever it is that God's sending them unless they get this out of the way. And there's several different money blocks that I teach people how to get out of the way. But sometimes, for example, like if you grew up in the church, like I grew up, like the church I grew up in late 70s, 80s, 90s, the church that I grew up in believed in the following ethos, okay? It believed this: broke is better. Like I was taught growing up that if you had money, you probably got that illegally and illicitly. And I was told growing up that the most important thing you could do is like give your money away, because if you gave it all away, then you would, have rewards in heaven. And I was having a conversation with God recently about this whole rewards in heaven thing. And I said, I said, which one is it? And he said, well, you can have both of those. He said, you can have copies if you want. You can have copies on earth and you can have rewards in heaven. In other words, sometimes having the resources on earth is what it's going to take to change the world. And I would tell you very directly, and without, I get in trouble for saying this, just so you know, the thing I'm about to say is very controversial, and I've had people who didn't like it, but I'm going to say it anyway. Elon Musk, in the last year and a half, Elon Musk has acted more like a kingdom person than most kingdom people I know, because acquiring the means of the world and using them to be able to change things is a kingdom move. Okay. And listen, right now, God is calling his people into government, into arts, into education. I think it was Ivy who mentioned the education. God's calling people into media, like, for example, Universal, Comcast. Those companies are on their way down. CNN, New York Times, those companies are experiencing the results of their disobedience to God, which is God is pulling away favor from them. And we need to be in position. Disney, as believers, I'm not even exaggerating. One of my goals and plans in the future is to be able to acquire Disney. Disney is doing this right now. They're experiencing the result of what happens when God begins to remove his favor because of disobedience. And as believers, we need to be in position to be able to jump in. And I mean this when I say this, acquire those companies. Acquiring those companies is going to require wealth, influence. It's going to require the right connections. And you can't get there if your software coding is off, okay? And if for some reason, like, you grew up thinking money doesn't grow on trees, or money is the root of all evil, which isn't even a Bible verse, by the way, it's not even close to what that verse says, then you're not going to be able to receive it. And so fundamentally what I do now, I didn't even get to tell you any of the background. Bottom line is I was an F-18 pilot, left, started and sold some businesses. Next thing you know, I'm speaking to big groups of entrepreneurs. Next thing you know, I'm coaching entrepreneurs, some of the biggest people in the world, some New York Times bestselling authors. Like, I'm coming in behind the scenes and helping all those folks. And all of a sudden I realized I'm pretty good at this. I didn't even know it at the time. By the way, when I first started teaching and coaching, I was what you would call a cessationist. I didn't believe in any of the gifts at all, even though I was using them. I didn't know I was using them, but I was. And next thing you know, I realized I was pretty good at being able to help people essentially do three things. Number one, make a lot of money. Number two, have a bigger impact. And number three, take more time off. In other words, do what they do with a lot more ease and lifestyle. And then several years ago, I wrote a book. This is the book that I'm actually the most passionate about right now. It's called God Talks. Essentially what it is, there's like 1 million books out there to teach people how to hear from God. There's also another 1 million books out there to teach people success, but there's actually one book, it's the one that I just showed you, that shows people how to take what they hear from God and use it to indelibly rewire the software in your brain. And I literally teach people how to recode and rewire the software coding, literally the code that happens in your brain. If you've ever had kids, I have 4 kids, by the way. My kids are 18, 16, 15, and 5. And I always tell people, I do know what causes that. And everyone asks, because there's a 10-year gap, okay? Everyone asks, oh, it must be like a second marriage, right? And I go, no, it's my same, it's the same wife. It's just our 7th marriage. Because if you've been married for 20 years, like some of you know, you're like on version 7.0 or whatever that was. And so yeah, so I wrote this book primarily to show God's people how to receive what's coming to them. Because like I said, God's wanting to move right now a lot of things into our laps. And when I say a lot of things, all the things I just mentioned, New York Times, CNN, Disney, some of the biggest companies in the world, some of the biggest wealth transfers in the world. Right now, our economy is like teetering. I think you can sense that, by the way. And I get a lot of emails right now from God's people who are nervous and fearful, like, what are we going to do when this happens? And I'm like, you smile, because God is using this disruption in the world to bless you. Look, some of the biggest times where some of the biggest millionaires and billionaires were made were during economic downturns. And so your job is to ask God, where do I need to be? What side of the cash register do I need to stand on? Where do I need to be able to position myself for the kind of influence that you want me to have? All right. So fundamentally, I'll teach this real quick, and then I will. I'm going to sit down and just kind of take your questions. Maybe we can pray together and see where God leads. So fundamentally, the most important thing you can do, I call this the prophetic arc and I'll do this fairly quickly. So let's say God has said something to you about your future, about wealth, about money, about your impact, about your vision, whatever. You're going to create this company and it's going to grow. God's going to send you a certain amount of wealth. You're going to transform the education system. You're going to go, like I think Michelle said, you're going to go share your story with unbelievers. Okay, so God says something to you or inspires you to do something, and then way over here is the result, right? So let's say, for example, God has spoken somehow to you that you're going to receive money. So this is, by the way, where the arc goes. I'm going to fill in the blanks here in a second. Let's say God's given you in some way or another, or someone has spoken to you that you're going to be receiving some kind of wealth, or that God's going to be able to bless you in a certain way. And when you receive that word, the first thing that you usually experience is hope, especially if God gives you a vision. When God gives you a vision and a mission, the first thing that happens in your heart is hope. And then you start on your way, and then eventually you find out that thing that God said to you doesn't happen. Now, I'm just going to say very directly, most people don't like to talk about this, but I talk about the things that are happening in real life because I work with real people. And I have a lot of friends of mine who have heard things from God or have been spoken from other people that said that those things were from God that didn't happen. And you're familiar with the verse in Proverbs that says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. And I know a lot of sick believers out there who are feeling the effects of, gosh, God has said all these things to me. Did I mess up? Was God wrong about that? Was the person wrong about that? They're asking all these questions. Okay, now, let's say this thing is about money. And if you end up with hope deferred, what ends up happening is the person ends up going back to the prophetic person, or they go back to the line at church and they hear another word and they end up in this circle that I call hopium. Okay, and that's essentially this gigantic circle of things never happening in someone's life, but continuing to receive these blessings and these new words from God. Okay, now let's say God's sending you money, or he said that he wants to send you money. But let's say you grew up like me in the church where broke is better, or money doesn't grow on trees, or like, money's the root of all evil, or whatever. Well, the first thing you need to do is get your mind straight. You need to get your software straight about what exactly God's sending you, because God uses the means of the world to send you money. So if he wants to give you influence or invite you to a speaking event, or like, for example, who's going to write the book? Dave. If God's saying, hey, write the book, but in the background, you're saying, gosh, I'm not worthy. I mean, who am I to write a book? I'm just like, regular person or whatever. Well, you're not going to receive what God has for you because you're beginning to push it away by your thoughts. And then the second thing I always tell people is, if God's saying something to you, then go get trained. If you're called to write a book, like clearly, Dave, you are, then go learn how to be able to do that. Maybe connect with some people who've written books before, or get trained by someone who can teach you potentially how to like communicate well through stories, which basically a good book is nothing but a series of really good stories with some awesome points. How to open loops and close them in following chapters, how to outline a really great book. In other words, get trained, because when you do these things, step one is to hear from God. Step two is to train your mind. Step three is to get trained in the skill that God wants you to do. And then four is the result. And the reason that I teach this, I will crawl over broken glass to teach this across the world right now to God's people, because God is, I mean this, when I say the word desperate, I'm putting a human emotion on top of God. And I know God is sovereign, and he's like, at peace, and he's in charge of the world. But at the same time, he uses terms to describe himself that are human terms so that we can connect with him. And so when I say desperate, you know what I mean when I say that. God is right now desperate for his people to open their eyes, to be able to train their brains, and to be able to train themselves so that they can receive what God's bringing them, because it's going to happen quickly. We're in the middle of a 5-year transitionary period in the spirit that started in 2020, ends in 2025. And during that entire time, God is completely shifting authority structures and giving some of the most normal, regular people these unbelievable blessings and anointing. Ron, I was mentioning this to you yesterday. One of the biggest demographics that God is calling into action is 65 plus right now. I have 80-year-olds. Dude, I have one guy that's 87 that God just spoke to him 20 more years of longevity and strength, because he's called back into leadership. 87, okay? Listen, I don't care how old you are or how many mistakes you've made. The subtitle of my book, so the book's called God Talks. It's how to have a friendship with God even if you've made a million mistakes. So I have people that come up to me when they get this book at my events and stuff. They'll come up to me and be like, hey man, million mistakes. You wrote that for me. And I'm like, why are you whispering? I have more people that have come up to me and been like, man, I have messed up. I've missed out. I've made a million mistakes. I'm like, yeah, me too. That's why I wrote the subtitle to me. Okay. So just so you know, I just want you to know this. George Soros, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, the vice president, they're not sitting around like, gosh, I've made so many mistakes. I hope God still feels like I'm qualified. They don't think that at all. Okay. Only God's people disqualify themselves because of the mistakes you've made. So when would now be a really good time to forget about all that stuff and move boldly into your bright future? Okay. And that's the point right there. That's what you're going to do. I'm going to sit back down. I kind of bounced around on a couple different things, Bill. And one of the things that you said, I'm going to switch my camera while I'm talking, which is like, a hard thing for even fighter pilots. We have a hard time clicking switches and talking at the exact same time. But interestingly, like what you had said regarding the tension, I think that was really cool, because part of your job as a believer is to live simultaneously in two places. Number one, in perfect contentment and rest in the things that God's given you, right? Paul said, I've learned the secret of being content. I'm like, I love the secret of being content. It's being so settled in the thing you have. And at the same time, Paul, who said, I've learned the secret of being content, literally wouldn't stop. He went from city to city to city to city. He couldn't stop until he did what he needed to do. And so your job is to do two things simultaneously. Number one, to be so peaceful and at rest in what God's given you and just enjoying the gifts of his presence and his spirit, while at the same time passionately desiring more and to see God change the nations. And he's going to be able to do that with you. And all you need to do, by the way, I love in Isaiah 6, God says, who will go? Who's going to go? And Isaiah's like, oh, here am I. I got some friends of mine that you should talk to. Isaiah didn't even know. Here's the crazy thing. Isaiah didn't even know. God said, who will I send? Isaiah said, just me. Send me. And then right after that, God gave him a mission, actually a very strange mission, to go close the hearts and minds of the people, right? Isaiah didn't know that was his job. God wanted him to say yes first and then go. And so your job is really simple. Be very content with what God's given you, and at the same time, so passionately desire the change in the world. I mean, I'm not kidding you. I'm training leaders right now for business, media, arts, industry. I've got folks that are moving into Hollywood right now that are about to take over that. People who are going to go take over the traditional news part. We're building another political party. All the stuff you're seeing in Washington right now, all you're observing right now are birth pangs. Okay, and look, I don't mean to offend like your political lineage or whatever. I used to be a Republican a long time ago. I left the Republican Party just because. Look, they're not okay. I don't know how to say this. Okay, let me just say it this way. One of my best friends is a guy named Richard Viguerie. Richard is in his 90s, and he essentially is the founder of the modern Republican Party. And he built Contract with America in his basement with Newt Gingrich. Okay, so this guy is like one of the most connected Republicans I know. And when I left the Republican Party like 7 years ago, I had dinner with Richard because he's a friend of mine. And I said, hey, man, I just want you to know as we start here, like I left the Republican Party. I don't want to offend you, Richard. And he reached out with both hands. He grabbed my arms and he said, Ed, you didn't leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party left you. Okay. And he's right about that, by the way. So what you're seeing in Congress right now is nothing but the birth pangs. God is wanting to do something different in the world. And when I say different, I'm talking about in all of the spheres. And you don't even have to be qualified. Honestly, you don't have to be qualified. God will make you qualified. You just need to be like, okay, I'll do it. All right. So Bill, that was like, I got like 2 minutes left until that time, but I'm going to stick around and answer some questions and maybe pray for some folks, but I want to kind of pause there and give it back.
Don't you love a pilot that can land that plane right on the nose, baby? That's really good, Ed. Appreciate you bringing that stuff. And I've already gotten texts from people just really lighting up. So yes, let's take a few minutes. And if it's okay, I'm going to continue to record because if it's too sensitive, let me know and I'll drop the recording maybe. And but keep going. Anybody got a question, thought, feedback for Ed?
Right. I do. Thank you, brother. Thank you for what you do. It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
You're
the book guy, right? Yeah,
I am. Thank you.
All right.
And I'm excited by what you share. Something that I have been wrestling with is Jesus is returning. Many people say it might be not as far in the future as some may say, but he has to return for a pure, spotless bride. I thought this great outpouring, which I've prophetically heard from many people I respect in the prophetic community, would purify the bride. But recently I heard, it was, I think, just a pastor's wife on YouTube who, and of course, it's social media, so we need to be careful and confirm, but it shook me a little because it wasn't what I thought was going to be the outpouring. It was a great shaking that will purify the bride. And what's coming is a great shaking. And those who persevere to the end, and the other, other scriptures that come into mind. When we see this outpouring where the God is reclaiming centers of power and wealth for the church for such a time, how does that factor into perhaps a shaking that will purify the church so Jesus can come back?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So a couple things really quickly. So fundamentally, I think one of the most important verses scripturally when it comes to the end is in 1 Corinthians 15, when it says, he will reign until he's put all enemies under his feet, and the last enemy that will be defeated is death. So I was telling everyone, any eschatology, which is basically study of the end times, any eschatology that leads to inactivity is not from God, okay? Because look, even Paul said that. What are you doing? Like, you're just sitting around waiting for the end times to come? And just so you know, ever since, about 34 AD, people have been waiting for, like, even in the Bible, you see, like, people were like, hey, is it now? Is it now? And so Jesus was like, hey, it's not for me to know times and seasons, which means it's not even for us to know times and seasons. Here's what I do know. God's given his people unbelievable authority and dominion over the earth. Quite a bit of what we're seeing right now in the earth, it may not be our fault, but it is our responsibility. And I will just tell you, those are near direct words that one day, it was about 6 years ago, I was sitting in my chair over here praying, and I was grumbling. I shouldn't even say praying, I was grumbling. Do you ever grumble with God? So I was grumbling, and I was grumbling about the government. Oh, all these corrupt people and the taxes. I was pissed at taxes for some reason. And God said, well, that's not your fault. And I was like, I know it's not my fault. Like, that's why I'm upset. And God said, but it is your responsibility now. And I stopped complaining right away when I realized it's my responsibility. And I think if the church had any idea how responsible we are, right? God's made us a kingdom of kings and priests. And it's really amazing when you think about it. Like, for example, I travel the world, right? And speak. And so if you go to England, the person in charge is the prime minister. The person in charge of the economy is the minister of economy. The person in charge of defense is the minister of defense. And here in America, we call them secretaries. That's because in 1776, we decided nothing the British do, we're going to do, And so we stopped calling people prime ministers and ministers, and we started calling them secretaries, which is weird. But when you say minister in the world, what the world thinks is, oh, that's the guy in charge. Like, my buddy is the former prime minister of Ethiopia, Tamrat Lane. When he was the prime minister of Ethiopia, he was in charge. Okay. Fascinating story, by the way. He was a communist. He's a believer now. He was a communist then. And 3 years after being the communist leader of Ethiopia, he said, I'm just going to tell you his words, and it's colorful language, but I'm going to tell you his words. He comes to his friend, who's also in charge with him, and he goes, this economic system, this is bullshit. That's what he said about communism. Okay, that's his words. Okay, so I thought if you ever want to talk to a friend who's a socialist, you tell him to talk to my friend who tried it for 3 years in an actual country. All right, so he was the prime minister, which means he was in charge, right? And here in the United States, if you say minister, you think, oh, that's the guy that gives the sermon or plays the guitar on Sunday morning, right? Well, yeah, they're in charge of the church, but when you say minister, it's church. So Ephesians 4:11 says, God's given apostles, evangelists, pastors, teachers, and prophets to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. In other words, all those people that we call ministers aren't, because you're a minister, because you're supposed to be in charge. And my calling is to teach God's people how to be in charge of businesses, be in charge of financial organizations. Like, for example, if we were in charge of CNN right now, the world would be different. If we were in charge of Washington right now, the world would be different. If we were in charge of the New York Times right now, the world would be different. If we were in charge of Disney right now, the world would be different. There's a reason we're meeting on this platform instead of Zoom. If we were in charge of Zoom, the world would be different. Bill.
To that point, if I can just add, if you could maybe put a parentheses around this word tension that you mentioned, this is a good one to help us understand what you're teaching us and training us to rule, to minister. But Jesus will often say, he who is first will be last, and how do we handle that intention to where we're meek and lowly like Jesus, but we're walking like David as a king?
Yeah, good.
How do we
awesome.
do that?
That's
How do we
super,
do
super, super. I love it. All right. So here's how I'm gonna more answer the question as how I do it. So there are people I know who filter everything through others. Like, for example, my wife's like that, man. She, almost to her detriment, frankly, she thinks of me and my kids and her friends and other. She will serve until she's done, and I'm like, hey, man, maybe you should just take a bath, like relax a little bit. Just give yourself some time. That's my wife. She filters everything through herself. I know some people who filter everything through themselves. You ever meet one of those people? Literally, like, you're talking about you again? Like, I don't even know, we were talking about something else, And so I call those self-sorters. And I think the best way to sort the world is through mission. Okay, so let me explain what this means. God's given you a mission, right, to accomplish. I know what mine is. I'm really clear, frankly, on what mine is. When God's given you that mission, you can be red hot, on fire for that mission, and whatever that matters and whatever that means in your life, you can do that without selfishness. So let me give you an example. Like, I have like 10 team members. I have people on essentially like a full-time kind of prayer team thing. And a lot of times those guys are serving me, but I don't see that way, and they don't see it that way either. We've had conversations about this because I know on this mission, primarily my job is to communicate, empower, get behind people, to strengthen people. And I've got some people who are right here who are gifted, literally gifted, to be like the guy with holding up the hands of the guy who will sit there and pray for strength and vitality and for the mission and for response. I have people praying right now. I'm not even kidding you. And sometimes I feel like, gosh, I'm just always asking them for prayer requests for me or whatever, but they don't feel like that because we're on a mission together. It's the same reason why, when you're on a military campaign, like when I'm a pilot, there's a guy putting gas in the airplane. There's another guy putting the fuel or the bombs in the airplane. There's another person checking the air pressure of the tires. I'm not sitting in the cockpit like, gosh, I'm so selfish. Look at all these guys. I should go out there and change the tires. You know what? I shouldn't change the tires. I'll break the airplane, right? I should not put the bombs on the thing. I'll explode the carrier deck, okay? Everyone has their mission. And sometimes as believers, we get into like, oh man, here I am. I'm sitting in the airplane, being all selfish. Everyone else is fixing my tires. You know what they're doing? They're doing what they love to do, changing tires. And I'm doing what I love to do. And when we get it together, we get to destroy the enemy.
Great word.
The way I look at it, the way I balance the tension is on mission. Because I'm not kidding you. I wake up in the morning and go to sleep thinking about the mission. I am so, by the way, the first thing if you don't know what God's calling you to do, that's like for real, step number one. There's an exercise in that book called on asking God about your purpose. There's 7 exercises in the book. There's 7 audios that companion the book. Those are totally free. You should buy the book, by the way. I'm biased. I always tell people this is the greatest book besides the Bible that was ever written. And I'm biased, but that doesn't mean I'm not right. So prove me wrong. I'm just kidding. So right. It's really good though. So
that's really good. And we'll put this in the email at the end.
Yeah.
So, you don't have to feel like you have to log it here, but there are a lot of resources that Ed's got. Ed's got a hard takeoff here in a few minutes. So I don't want you to lose the opportunity, Ed, for you to speak to people, but maybe we can take another 5 minutes or so on some Q&A.
Let me just say, can I say a couple things? Just
sure.
Make sure that I get to check the box. All right. So Ron, I already told you, like, as you're introducing yourself. So Ron, the stage that you've moved into, I would say moving into, but you've already moved into it. Actually a couple of years ago, is called Sage. So the stage is called sage.
Amen.
And the sage isn't the king, because you were the king. The sage is the person who comes in and comes next to the king when the king needs help. And the sage comes in and just delivers wisdom. And that's the gift that God's giving you to do. And so there's a little less activity, but a lot more of you speaking words in its perfect time. And that's your like next 20 years. So it's very exciting.
Awesome.
Dave, write the book. That's all I have to say to you about that. So write the book. For real, just write it. And just so you know, my first book, I have it back here someplace, was a gigantic flop. Okay. And this book behind me has done really well. And the book before, like my 21-Day Miracle book, which I'm not even here to talk about today, that book was gangbusters, man. It was Amazon's #1 business book. Shoot, it was the number 22 book over all books. It was top 25. That's for you. And then Laura, the verse I have for you that God just wanted me to like, I'm going to find the actual reference. It's Isaiah 54, 11. Oh, shoot, my internet. Okay, here it is. Isaiah 54, 11. O afflicted one, storm-tossed and not comforted. But behold, I will set your stones in antimony and lay your gates, your foundation with sapphire. And then I'm going to skip a verse and say, all your children will be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children. So there's this picture I have of you sort of, you're working hard and like serving a lot of people, and you're storm-tossed and not comforted. And God's saying, all your children, not just your natural children, all the people who come to you will be taught by the Lord, and great will be the peace of your children. And that was you, Laura, if you're still here. I hope you're still here. Yeah, there she is. All right, awesome. That's those are things, 3 things that I wrote down. Is that helpful for you, Laura? Great.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely. Thank you, my friend.
good. So God gives you that peace too, by the way. So you're welcome to take a hold of that peace that he gives to your children, because he's going to give it to them through you. Awesome. And that's it. Bill, go back to the questions and we'll keep rocking and rolling, man.
Yep. Comments, feedback, questions.
This is
The
my
window
favorite
is open. Who is that? Somebody say something?
Oh, yes, this is Heather. I just had a quick question. You mentioned that you're not a Republican anymore. What do you call yourself now? Just curious.
I call myself an American. So full transparency, I'm in the process of essentially trying to launch what I consider to be America's first party. The Democratic Party does not represent their traditional base at all. Okay. So like the Democratic Party used to be the party of the working person. Like literally they represented the disenfranchised and the working person. And that's not anywhere close. Like if you see a work truck go by, you don't think, oh, that's probably a Democrat. So the Democratic Party's got like 3 schisms in it. And there's nothing representing their traditional base. And frankly, the Republican Party doesn't represent their base at all. There's small groups of it that do. So yeah, we're just trying to build something that we think represents the actual America, and without all of the greasy, corrupt ties that currently exist inside of the United States. So my official affiliation is called NPP, which is no party preference or no party affiliation. And by the way, when I did that, it's crazy what happens when you, and I'm not saying you need to do this, but when I took that step, I allowed myself to think independently on all of the issues. And the truth is, I found myself all over the map when it came to the issues, and like not even on the scale. Like a lot of times I was completely off the map because, you know, if you spend your time, like I spend a lot of my time reading through 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. That's really, if you want to lead, those are really good places to be, because you just see examples of leadership, good and bad, the good and the bad and the ugly. And if you do that long enough, you start to see answers in America for problems that we traditionally have. And the fact is, the current parties don't really do a very good job of answering any of the problems, because the first step to solving most of the problems in America are changing people's hearts first. Okay, let me give you an example, and then Bill, I'll pitch it back to you.
One thing before you do, is edrushforamerica.com.
Yeah.
I'll put that in
you
the
can read a
chat.
little bit there. So, so thank you. So I'll give you an example. The Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. I don't think it should come as a surprise to you that I'm 100% in support of that decision. Okay, but for the last 40 years, in the church, we've been praying that God would put Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court so that we could overturn Roe v. Wade. And essentially, what the church did was look at the Supreme Court as the solution to the problem. If we can only get the right people on the Supreme Court, we'll finally be able to overturn Roe v. Wade. And by the way, we did. And that's wonderful that we did. And oh, by the way, abortions are happening all over the country right now and across the country, literally as we speak. And so we got the answer to what we wanted, and not much changed. And the reason not much changed is because the hearts of the people didn't change. What happened was we changed the law, and you can change as many laws as you want to, but people's hearts have to change. And so the first thing to pray for when it comes to that particular issue is that God would begin to change people's hearts. And he can do that, by the way. He can do that very quickly, especially the way media works in our country, the way people's minds shift and change so quickly. And so as believers, we have to start asking God, what's the mission first? And I think we got a little ahead of our skis, looking essentially at the Supreme Court like as the answer to all of our problems, because they did what we wanted them to do and it didn't solve the problem, at least not yet. So go ahead, back to you.
Awesome. Other thoughts, questions, feedback?
Hey, Bill, it's Ike. Can I ask a question?
Come on, brother.
Ed, love what you just shared. Glad this is recording because I didn't get the whole breath of this. I came in a little late. But the idea about America's first party sounds brilliant. From my perspective, I feel like, and I grew up in a third world country, and so I've seen dirty politics, what I thought was dirty politics until I understood how our
Share where in Africa you're from.
Nigeria and West Africa.
Okay.
So I used to think we had the most corrupt political system until I started understanding how the Republicans and the Democrats both work in the same team, but put on a farce to make it seem like they're opposing each other.
Yeah.
So beyond that issue is the fact that it feels like our votes don't count anymore, whether it's through rigging voting systems or understanding the nucleus of how policy actually gets to be changed in our country, which is through the technocrats and the non-governmental institutions, whether it's the World Economic Forum or a list of others who significantly shape policy in Washington. So until we get some righteous people that are sitting in some of these major institutions who have the wherewithal to righteously influence policy like most billionaires are doing right now, I don't see any dramatic shifts in righting the political sphere anyway. In the short term.
Yeah, good. So as far as I see it, so a couple things have to happen. First of all, the economic shaking that we're all talking about is a really big part of this. And so we've been asking God to change the government, and for the most part, people do not people don't change things that are just okay, you know. But when the stuff hits the fan and the world begins to tremble, people start looking, and I mean this when I'm talking like pitchforks and bonfire level stuff. Like there's this undercurrent of angst right now, and people are starting to get really frustrated with their governmental leaders, but it hasn't crossed over the line. Let me explain what I mean by crossing the line. So in Virginia in 2020, when Glenn Youngkin got elected as governor, the issue that got him elected was the schools. It was the issue. And what happened was, say for the last 20 years, the school system was kind of screwed up, but not enough that people got really upset about it. Like it was frustrating. And the parents were like, but there's like this line. And what happened was once Virginia crossed over the line, and with all the transgender stuff, like the bathrooms and everything, once they crossed over and the parents started saying things, all of the other things they were upset about but haven't mentioned for 20 years came out too. Like they just went at it. And he was smart enough, Governor Youngkin was smart enough to like leverage that as like the topic. And so what happens is people are just kind of under the surface, like kind of frustrated. but they don't feel like they have a voice and they don't think that they can do anything about it. And then all of a sudden, like there's this cathartic moment where the powers that be literally can't hold on to it anymore. And the pendulum swings so fast that nobody can hang on. And the fact is, the American people are very fickle, and that's not a good trait. But God can use that trait to make change happen very, very quickly. And it's been done before, by the way. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected as president as a Republican, and up until then, the only people who were president were Democrats or Whigs. Okay, but the Democrats were pro-slavery, the Whigs couldn't figure out what they wanted, and the Republicans were abolitionists. And so half the country moved over to the abolitionist side, voted Abraham Lincoln in as a third-party president, by the way. He was a third-party president. And that was because of an issue that people were animated about. And so it's not only can it happen again, that was 1860 before the internet, you know. Now it's like those things can happen like that. So be encouraged. And God has a wonderful, wonderful way of exposing corruption. And here's how he does it. There is a literary pattern that God has used over and over and over and over again. It's fascinating that the enemy hasn't figured this one out. God almost always uses the weapon that the enemy created for others against themselves. So, for example, one morning, Goliath sharpening his sword. Man, I'm going to kill somebody today. And he didn't know that afternoon his sword would be used to chop off his own head. Haman builds these gallows. Like, how horrible of a human being do you have to be to build gallows for an individual? Because he wanted to hang Mordecai. He's like, I'm going to build these gallows. I'm going to hang that guy Mordecai. He built this huge gallows in his backyard, which is sick. Okay. And later on that month, Haman was hanging from his own gallows. God very often uses the exact thing that they created to be able to do their horrible, evil thing against them. And you should not only should you expect that, but you should pray for that, because you watch in the next year and a half, you watch as that begins to come into pass. God has a wonderful sense of humor that way.
Amen.
So, yes, sir.
Great stuff. Awesome. I am going to pause it here because I know we got about 8 or 9 minutes before Ed jets off. We want to pray for him. And if I can, I don't want to come over you on this, Ed, but just to compliment what you've said. What the Lord had been showing me for years, particularly in 2008 on to now, he started off saying that the issues would no longer be defined by the candidates or the politicians, but he's going to let the issues define them.
Mm-hmm.
Around 2012 to 15, he shifted it to where he was going to let the issues define the church.
Mm-hmm.
That's still going on, by the way. But in recent years, I'd say in the last 4 or 5, he's letting the issues define us. Where do we stand? And one of the things the Lord's been really hammering into me is, where do I stand? And I look at 1 Kings 17:1, where Elijah spoke to the king with honor, but he said, the God before whom I stand, I say. And so there was this honoring, but he knew who his authority was. And so I would just encourage us, as Ed's encouraging us, to stand boldly, to be courageous in the sphere of influence, the mission, which I love Ed was saying, stay on mission. That'll keep you. And if you stand on that mission, you'll be bold and courageous, and don't worry about the conflicts out there, because these conflicts that are coming towards us are the very things that God's using, as he said, to disrupt. And those who are corrupt, their very plans are going to be turned against them. And it's a beautiful thing, but we need to be very much like King David in this. And this is why I love, again, Ed, the people that were under Saul's political system, as it were, he honored it anyway. King David did, even when he's hiding in caves. But what you see is it's a lot of those soldiers that wouldn't go fight Goliath, guess what? They migrated over to David because he had character, and they knew he knew his God.
Yeah.
But look what happened. These mighty men and women, it will bridge the gender gap there. These people became the most amazing mighty warriors, but worshipers too, because David taught them how to do that. So anyway, I just want to encourage you, just taking that to embellish what Ed is saying. Each one of you has that mission. And as he said, get that software right. If today's helpful for that, for you to just break another synapse up there and say, whoops, I am called to this mission that God's put me in. May God bless you in that. I'm gonna stop oh, you have something, anybody, before I cut the.
No, man, let's do it.
All right, I'm gonna cut the recording. We're gonna pray for Brother Ed, and thank you, Ed, for sharing